is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 199, covering the week of December 16th through December 23rd, which is a little longer than a week, 2019. Glad to have you back in the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Abbeville Institute, like our Facebook page at Abbeville Institute, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube page at Abbeville Institute. You can also go to our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org. You can find all our social media buttons there. Click on those. It'll take you right out to our accounts. While you're there, give us an email address, and we'll give you a free ebook. You'll get our daily dose of Dixie Monday through Friday and our weekly email on Saturday or Sunday, which includes a link to this podcast. You can also download our free mobile app. Just go to your app store, whether it's on Apple or a Google device, whatever you use, and just search for Abbeville Institute. You'll find our app, download that. You get our podcast on the go along with all of our lectures and mobile access to the website. It's a great way to keep in touch with us without actually having to go on your desktop computer. So it's a wonderful way to do that. Also, don't forget that we exist on your generous contributions alone. So if you like what we do, if you like the podcast, if you like the website, if you like the conferences, please consider a tax-deductible donation to the Abbeville Institute. We cannot do what we do without you. And of course, the end of the year is coming up. I'll talk about that in this particular show. It'll be the last thing I talk about. So if you're making your plans for 2019, for your tax plans for 2019, please consider making that contribution. Okay, all of that said, also, don't want to forget to mention our nice embroidered material. Just go to abbevilleinstitute.org, click on that support tab, which is also where you find how you can donate for us. You can click on that shop or donor options, and you can buy your embroidered material. If you want that, t-shirts, hats, golf shirts, fleece jackets, golf towels. Also, again, this is where you find your way to donate. So click on that donor options tab. And please also share our material out on social media and review and rate our podcast. Do things like that because that does, again, help us reach more people. Okay, all of that said, let's talk about this last week of 2019. This will be the last podcast of 2019. It's been a great year at the Abbeville Institute. Not so great for the South in terms of the social justice warrior, cultural Marxist attack on the South. It's been absolutely horrible in some places. But hopefully there is some silver lining, and I think that silver lining is that we continue to exist. We continue to do what we do. We've gathered more listeners this year. We're able to reach more people this year, and that's a wonderful thing. So the more people we reach, the more that we do in that way, the more that the Southern tradition will be explored, the more the Southern tradition will be defended, and that's the important thing that we can look at from the silver lining in these very dark clouds. I just had someone email me the other day talking about North Carolina, how bad it is in certain parts of North Carolina now. Well, that actually fits in with a theme, one of the pieces for the week, on the colony of the South. You see, this is by design. Once the war was over in 1865, the South became an economic colony of the North, and not just that, also a political and social colony of the North. Now, it took some time for some of this to take place, but Northerners have been moving into the South for years, and as they come into the South, a lot of times, particularly in areas like Charleston, they think we're going to move to Charleston because we don't like where we're from. We don't like what's going on in New England or the Rust Belt. We don't like these areas, so we're going to move. We're going to retire down to Charleston. It's nice and warm down there. There's a nice hospitality. But when they get down to Charleston, they make Charleston like where they're from. And so Charleston begins to change. This is happening all over the South. The attack that you're seeing in places like North Carolina on Confederate monuments is not being perpetuated by people that are from North Carolina. It's being perpetuated by people that aren't from North Carolina, but that have moved into North Carolina. It's an immigration problem from the United States. Most of these people, and one of the other pieces we have this week, we'll talk about that as well with South Carolina. It's it's a problem of cultural displacement. You see, these people don't really care about Confederate monuments or Confederate soldiers or the Southern tradition because they have no skin in the game. It doesn't, I mean, their tradition is not being affected at all. So they think they can come in and bulldoze everything and just say, you know what, this isn't really our tradition. It's you hayseeds or you hillbillies from North Carolina. We're going to come in and make it better for you. And it's not just people on the left that are doing this. And I've mentioned this before. This book by Forrest Neighbors, From Oligarchy to Republicanism, where he essentially says this. Neighbors lives in Alaska. And he says, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to teach the South how to be good Americans. And I'd like for them to understand that by having these Confederate monuments and all these things, they're not being good Americans. They're supporting things that would really make their blood boil if they knew what they were really about. I don't think so, neighbors. I don't think that if a Southerner who was tied to these people by blood, these are their ancestors. You're saying to them that, well, if you really knew how bad your ancestors were, you wouldn't like them. You can't even get, look, this guy's a conservative, quote unquote. You can't even get more evil in some ways than that by saying that your ancestors are horrible people. And if you really knew about them, you would hate them. No other people in the United States are subjected to this. Only Southerners. I mean, no one goes up into New England and says, you know what, if you knew how bad your Puritan ancestors were and how they were the primary drivers in the slave trade, how they hung Baptists and whipped Indians, you know, if you just knew how bad these people were, you would hate them. No, because we celebrate the Pilgrims, anyways, every November. I mean, we know that's not the first Thanksgiving, but we have to celebrate that. Somehow, New England escapes anything that's, I mean, it'd be, as Don Livingston said, it'd be wonderful to live in a place where your ancestors did nothing wrong. At least that's the perception. So here we have in the South the only group of people in America that you're allowed to say, you know what, your people are bad. Your people are wrong. Last time I checked, there's no evidence of a person being beaten with a Confederate flag. However, we do know that's the case in New England, where we have an image of it from the 1970s where a black American is being beaten with a U.S. flag in Boston. I mean, hey, but who's splitting hairs here, right? So when you look at what's happened over this last year, it's gotten worse. I mean, 2015 really kicked off the modern assault on all things Confederate, and it's only, I mean, 4 years later, we're still, and it's steamrolling now in some places. But it's not just all things Confederate. It's also all things Southern. I mean, look, Thomas Jefferson is under attack. George Washington's under attack. James Madison's under attack. We know that, I was just speaking to someone who is familiar with the attendance at Monticello. Attendance has dropped dramatically because people don't want to go listen to the stupid, politically correct nonsense when they go tour his house. But that's what we're getting because these people think, well, this is what people want to hear. No, it's not what they want to hear. They want to go hear about Thomas Jefferson, not everything else that was wrong with Thomas Jefferson or that he did all these horrible things. They don't want to hear about that. They want to hear about the good things of Thomas Jefferson. If you're not going to talk about that, we're not going. You see, we've gone too far in the other direction. And a lot of Americans are just saying, enough is enough. We're not doing this anymore. So you don't have any money. I think that eventually there's going to be a turn, but I don't know when that's going to take place. And unfortunately, with the millennial generation, the young generation, they're being indoctrinated in schools to believe that America, or at least Southerners, are horrible people and that need to be essentially eradicated from society. There's nothing good in the South. There's nothing good in the Southern tradition. Even Southerners are being taught this, to hate themselves. This is another round of Reconstruction, which is why, again, the Abbeville Institute exists. Because we offer the counterweight. I mean, we're going to go down swinging and telling people about the good things about the South and the Southern tradition and what's real about it, what's true about it, which is why I would hope that you would support our mission and help us keep doing these things. So let's talk about the pieces for the week. First, we have a piece on Richard Jewell. Now, if you're not familiar with Richard Jewell, of course, Richard Jewell was the man who saved hundreds of people in Atlanta in the 1996 Olympics from a bomb. We know that he wasn't the guy that put the bomb there, but he was smeared for weeks by the mainstream media, the press, that this was the guy that really did it. Why? Well, because he had a Confederate flag on his pickup truck. And there were pictures of him in camouflage with an AR-15. This was just seen. I mean, this guy is just a radical militia, redneck Confederate flag guy. So he obviously had to do it. Some right-wing terrorist. Now, we know it wasn't him. As a matter of fact, they found the culprit. But Richard Jewell was run through the mud for weeks. And so we have the new film coming out by Clint Eastwood. And this is, I mean, I can't wait to see the film. The left hates it. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is already trying to threaten to sue Clint Eastwood without a disclaimer. He's saying, yeah, right, whatever. And I mean, this is beautiful. So we have this piece that gets into detail on all the things that the media got wrong about Richard Jewell. And the title is Remembering Hero Richard Jewell, Confederate Flag Supporter. That he was, a trial by media. He was attached to Timothy McVeigh and the Branch Davidians and all these people. And of course, we know Eric Rudolph was the guy who did it, and Richard Jewell was the hero who saved people. But this poor man was destroyed. He lived in a house, kind of a poor house, and he wasn't. He was just this old white redneck. I mean, I love the fact that Clint Eastwood took this on and gave it back to the media for what they did to this poor man. Now, and of course, it was the flag and the militia outfit, supposedly quote unquote militia outfit, all these things. And now I didn't live in Atlanta at the time or in the South. I lived in Maryland. But so I wasn't on top of the story as much back then. But certainly, I mean, for people that were living around here and seeing this on a daily basis, I mean, it was horrible. And I love the fact that Clint Eastwood has taken such a political hot potato, and he has made it into a feature film that, frankly, I mean, people are raving about, but he's never going to win any awards because he takes down the left. I mean, Clint Eastwood is a jewel, and the man's in his 90s, so unfortunately, he's not going to be around forever. But this is great. I mean, the best Clint Eastwood movie of all time, in my opinion, is The Outlaw Josie Wales, and I know a lot of people think that too. Wonderful movie. And he is the great Confederate soldier, spitting tobacco on the North. But it's great that we have this pushback. I mean, we need these things. This is a major feature film. It's pushing back against the left. And of course, Richard Jewell died in 2007, so he didn't live to see how his story is being portrayed in a feature film and positively portrayed in a feature film. This is the kind of stuff, and I think the film is doing well in the box office. This is the kind of stuff that drives the left mad. Because all the money they spend, all the things they do, and people don't go watch their stupid movies. But conservatives will turn out in droves to watch these kind of movies. Now, then we have the piece on Wednesday is Nikki Haley backtracking on the Confederate flag, or backpedaling on the Confederate flag. This is by Al Benson. And if you didn't know, about a week ago, Nikki Haley went on the Glenn Beck program, and she said, the flag was distorted after 2015. A lot of people, were wrestling with this. And of course, the left went mad. You had people like Kevin Levin, published this whole thing on Twitter. Oh, this is all the images of where the flag, and of course using things that aren't true. One of the things he said is that there was a lynching in around 1920 in Mississippi where a guy was forced to kiss a Confederate flag. There was one newspaper account, and I can't even find the paper itself that said this, but there were several that didn't list that at all, or even list the lynching the way that this one newspaper account listed it. So the evidence is dubious at best, if not outright wrong. But he cites it as fact. And then, of course, he lists all these different Confederate flags with the Klan and other things. Well, I mean, we could do this with the U.S. flag all day. I mean, just because some idiots say this is what it means doesn't mean this is what it means. Would you say that if the Klan is walking around with a U.S. flag, the U.S. flag means it's white supremacist? I mean, the fact that the U.S. flag has been used to bomb thousands and thousands of people, non-white people around the world, does that make it racist? It's been flown over these things. Does that make it racist? So, I mean, these are questions that nobody really can answer, and they can't answer them well because it would just destroy their entire argument, right? So we have this. Nikki Haley went on the Glenn Beck program and said this, and of course, this is the woman that took down the flag as governor of South Carolina on the State House grounds. A compromise where the flag came off the dome and was moved to the Soldiers' Monument. Of course, then that was taken down. Wasn't supposed to be taken down from there. And I was in South Carolina when all this happened. Well, at least when the flag was moved. And, you know, at that point, everyone knew that if you move it there, the compromise was a capitulation, that it's going to come down eventually. It was known. But here you have Nikki Haley 15 years later doing it. And now she's trying to sell a book, and Al Benson points this out. We're just not going to buy your book. We don't believe you. I mean, you're trying to get the people of South Carolina to buy your book by saying, you know, I know that you all really love the flag, but we had to do this. Why? I mean, this is the question. Why? You didn't have to do anything. It didn't have to be done at all because one moron goes out and does something stupid. One sick individual, mentally ill individual at that, goes out and does something stupid. We don't do this with any other symbol in America. We know that there have been times that other symbols have been used, but other people had symbols, and then they did stupid, horrible things, but we don't do anything with those symbols. But yet this one symbol becomes the scapegoat. Well, it's because of this flag. It's because of this flag this guy did this. No, it's because the guy was mentally ill that he did this. The flag had nothing to do with it. The monuments have nothing to do with it. But of course, this is where they've been able to, the culture Marx has been able to capitalize on this because, these are things that, symbols of white supremacy. But we know it's, there. If we want to talk about symbols of white supremacy, the Lincoln Memorial is a symbol of white supremacy. I mean, this is just stupid. These are stupid arguments by stupid people. But yet, here we are. Nikki Haley's trying to change her tune, and Al Benson's not letting her do it. And this is par for the course. I mean, this is where we're at in 2019. And this is because, as I said, the South has become really a colony of the North. And the book review that we had this week by Joe Stromberg is on Joseph Persky's Burden of Dependency, Colonial Themes in Southern Economic Thought. And it's really a book about economics. But when you look at how that works and how that plays into social and political dynamics, as the South becomes this again, economic colony of the North, people move into the South to take advantage of that. And because of that, the South is going to be forever changed. Because the South decided to adopt the Northern Hamiltonian view of American commerce, the South was going to change. Now, in this book, Persky actually brings up the agrarians. He brings up the 1930s and the response to this economic colonialism by the agrarians, the Southern agrarians of the 1930s. Look, this review, it's a long review, but it's an excellent review that gets into the economics of the South, the colonialism of the North and how that actually influenced Southern history. And, of course, this very interesting American Review, which was a short-lived series on agrarianism that is a publication, and how that actually was there in the 1930s, as a result of I'll Take My Stand, 1930-31. One thing he points out, he says, meanwhile, sociologists at the University of North Carolina, when it actually was halfway decent, Howard Odum, Rupert Vance, and others, studied the Southern political economy. They promoted moderate regionalism and regional planning within a national compromise. Vance's colonial critique, Persky says, came close to defining a new and serious political economy of regions. Extractive economics had trapped the South in single-crop cotton production, reinforced that trap in an over-specialized commercialism. It was a debtor economy characterized by retarded adoption of machinery and overproduction. Segregated schools were another inefficiency. A corporate oligopoly, oversaw this profitable trap. Rather than personalized villains, the system was at fault. Persky comments the agrarians wrote a manifesto, the social scientists an apology. So the fact is, the agrarians were pointing out the problem, and no one could really figure out what to do about it. The problem, of course, was the North. The problem was that we had the South defeated and reconstructed, not just socially, which everyone focuses on, but also politically and economically. I mean, that's the part of Reconstruction that people miss. How when the stock prices became more important than cotton prices in the South, I mean that changed everything. The South no longer was the South. And we could say, well, I mean, industrialization has brought good things to the South, and the standard of living has increased in the South. Yeah, I mean, all that's true. But at the same time, there's something that's lost in that. And this is where the Southern tradition, I mean, can the Southern tradition exist within the confines of this new economy and this new society in the South? Well, certainly, but you have to actively think about it. And it's very hard to do when you have both the left and the right pushing a different agenda. The piece on Friday, A Land of Lawless Lawyers, gets into the impeachment fiasco in D.C. and the fact that people don't even understand the Constitution itself in D.C. And the fact that lawyers are often behind some of these problems. As Yarborough points out in this piece, when Clyde Wilson said in From Union to Empire, quote, I've often heard members of Congress and other public officers answer a constitutional question with the quip that they are not constitutional lawyers. Nonsense. Members of Congress, the president, more importantly, the people and officials of the states have just as much standing in interpreting the Constitution as any panel of lawyers or law professors, whether or not the latter has been appointed to the federal bench. The founders never intended that the high political questions of constitutional interpretation should be at the mercy of lawyers' tricks. But this is what we have, and he's getting into the fact that some of these people, at the impeachment process, I mean, they're nincompoops. Far-left radical nincompoops. And this is what we're dealing with in many ways in this culture war, because lawyers have gotten involved on both sides to try to change the focus of look, the monuments are being protected by law, so lawyers are getting involved in trying to take them down by law. I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And, of course, Yarborough has talked a lot about how Republicans, with friends like these, I mean, who needs enemies? Republicans, Nikki Haley is Republican, and Glenn Beck votes Republican. I mean, with friends like these, how do you need enemies? We've got enough of them on the progressive left. But now that you have the neoconservative right getting involved in this, I mean, it's... I told a friend of mine the other day, we're standing trying to climb Mount Everest with shorts, shirts, and flip-flops on and no gear. I mean, we got to get up the mountain. And it's a daunting task. It's why we have, Clyde Wilson writing a Southerner's movie guide, this one on Amistad and all the problems with that particular film. And it's a wonderful review of just that film. This part 3 of his movie guide is just focusing on Amistad and how much of it was fabricated. And this is Spielberg. It's what he does. The Lincoln film, so much is fabricated. This is fabricated. This is why the Institute continues to exist, because people need to know these things. People know there's something wrong. People in the South in particular can see there are things wrong. And it just continues to get worse, except for a few voices in the wilderness like the Abbeville Institute. And so on the 23rd, which I won't be podcasting that week, but the piece we're going to run on the 23rd, The Culture War Continues, is an appeal from the president, Don Livingston, to support the Institute. And he says, the culture war rages on, and what a war. There seems to be a new outrage almost every day. Make It Right, a New York-based organization dedicated to hunting down and removing all Confederate monuments from public space, has as a symbol an image of the Statue of Lee being taken down by a crane in New Orleans. And the director of the organization, Callie Holloway, recently penned a piece applauding a recent decision by 2 North Carolina towns to cancel their annual Christmas parades because the SCV and UDC have traditionally presented floats during the events. The Council of American Islamic Relations has requested that Google, Amazon, and other large online tech companies ban the sale of neo-Confederate propaganda like the widely popular The South Was Right. Why? Because they believe it fosters white supremacy. Even conservative voices support a version of Southern history at odds with the facts. Glenn Beck recently promoted a version of the Confederate Constitution that does not match the original text or original understanding of the document. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This effort at ethnic and cultural cleansing of the South has received little resistance by Southern elites. Instead of using these events as a teaching moment, as President Eisenhower did when he was asked to remove a portrait of Robert Lee from the Oval Office, they usually are morally disarmed and reduced to silence, or use the event to signal their virtue in opposing white supremacy and asking for healing but not truth, oblivious to the fact that the North was not willing to put forth a morally responsible plan for emancipation and was itself white supremacist to the core. This attack on Confederate monuments springs from the ideology of political correctness and multiculturalism that appeared in the late 1960s. This ideology is not peculiar to America. It is global and is forcing not only Southerners, but the British, French, Germans, and other historic peoples of Europe, as well as Americans generally, to ask the unsettling question, who are we? In a healthy society, one knows one's identity, not by thinking about it philosophically, but by simply living it in community with others. We don't, however, live in normal times. So we must address with the question, who are we? Jimmy Carter would sometimes say in speeches, and not only to Southerners, that he was proud to be an American, but prouder still to be a Southerner. What did he mean by that? The Institute exists to explore that question and to explain and defend the permanent things in the Southern tradition, its long contested relation to an America that is now coming apart. A poll conducted by Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service found that 67% of Americans believe we are 2/3 of the way to a civil war. We pray that isn't true. Whether true or not, it is imperative that we educate the public in what is true and valuable in the Southern tradition, something no longer done in higher or secondary education, and especially that we reach our young people. Our website now contains nearly 2,000 articles on Southern culture, history, religion, literature, music, philosophy, film, architecture, food, politics, economics, and humor, and nearly 500 audio files from our popular weekly podcasts and lectures from past conferences and summer schools. All of this is free of charge. With the year coming to a close, we would ask for your financial assistance in maintaining the Institute as a viable and productive voice of the Southern tradition. We have big plans for next year, including 3 public conferences, new titles from the Abbeville Institute Press, and a series of videos designed to push back against the anti-Southern bias across the political spectrum. Your support is critical to making those things happen. No donation is too small. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And until next year, good day.